Okay, thank you and welcome back to Nine World Chronicles, where we do what we do. It's talk about mythology, which is what I love, which brought me here in the first place. Mythology is obviously integrally tied with people who develop these stories to explain events and their cosmology. And mythology is often tied to real events, such as temples and also festivals. And one of the most important festivals for the ancient Kemetic people was the return of the wandering goddess, which is a very joyous event which had barks running up the Nile River. There was great feasting, dancing, singing, drinking, and commemorating of the return of the goddess who had ventured off to the Nubian desert and had to be cajoled to come back. Now, these are very important mythologies because in the Kemetic thought, the concept of Ma'at, which we've talked about before, which is truth, justice, order, and balance, is the foundation of the cosmos itself. And we have to remember that they saw the Neters or the gods reflected not only on the earth in their machinations here, but also they were reflected in the cosmos. And we've shown some representations that show that cosmology, that linking of the earth-bound deities, and also what we saw up in the cosmos when we looked in the night sky. So it's very important to remain in tune with natural processes. The way the moon and the sun and the stars moved across the sky could convey whether we were out of balance. And if we were out of balance, that would mean dreadful things and doom for all people. And this was represented heavily in their mythologies, but none more so than a very simple story that I think has always been very important, or one of my favorite stories. And this is the legend of the wandering goddess. And depending on how the story is interpreted, it may represent multiple deities for various reasons, depending on the interpretation. Now, the story of the wandering goddess basically is a story, or this goddess would be called the wandering goddess, or the distant goddess, or the sun eye. And it takes place at a time when Atun Ra himself still lived on Earth, and he governed Earth. And there's lots of stories about this. The story of Sekhmet is a story about his time on Earth and his rulership. But this goddess, and it could be Aset, in this case we're going to use a depiction of Hathor, who is my favorite. I know she's listening. And she becomes angry. The story doesn't tell us why she becomes angry, but we know that she leaves the kingdom and she wanders south into Nubia. And Ra obviously is very upset. This is one of his beloved daughters, but also she is the eye of Ra, which is his protective spirit. So without her, he is missing his protection, but also the love of his kinship. Missing his daughter and needing her protection, he enlists the aid of her brother Shu, who was the powerful lion-headed Netor, in this telling he is, and the wise Jehudi, to bring her back. So both of these two Netors venture out into the land of Nubia, seeking to bring her back. And while they find her, she is still very, very upset. Remember, the wrath of one of these goddesses, they're very much legendary. But after much talk, it is Jehudi who promises her entertainment, offerings, temples, and presents, and also beer, which we know she loves. It convinces her to come back. One of the gifts was also the Wabsheb, which is a symbol of orderly time. So finally they convince the goddess to come back, and as they return, she finds that there are festivals being held at every stop that they make. There is a festival at Philae, where she purifies herself in sacred water. There is another festival of transformation, where they bathe her and clothe her and put her in finery. So when she comes home, she sees her father and he greets her and he is satiated. And once again, the cosmos has returned. Everything is back in order. She is divine again. She is back in her protective role. And it was a very important time. Now, the importance of the story, which seems small, has massive cosmological effects because these Neters represented different aspects. So when this deity is gone, it can represent many things. It can be a representation of the shift of the sun as we're going from one season, the hot season of summer and spring, to the colder season where the sun has a much more subdued role. And the celebration, of course, is when that deity or the sun comes back. So in that regard, this becomes a seasonal occurrence related to fertility and growth in springtime, like we see reflected in many other religions. But also it can also represent on a more larger cosmological scale the disappearance of the Sirius star, which happens at certain times, but the star will return, of course, marking the new year. So we're talking about the rotation of the cosmos. Now that would represent the returning of the new year, which of course we still celebrate now, but also the inundation is also related to this story. Now, in that version, we would then see the deity who was the wandering goddess as the lion goddess Sekhmet. And the reason for that is when she left, it was at the time when the Nile was at its lowest. And this was a time of drought and sometimes disease that came along with it. Of course, her return would coincide with the inundation of the Nile and thus the return to the fertility of the land. So a very simple mythological story that explains an angry deity leaving, venturing to Nubia to come back and be celebrated really lays out the map work for a larger cosmological view and how we had to maintain Ma'at. The processions, the festivals, the sacrifices were all made to appease the cosmos. To the pharaoh had, or excuse me, the Nasut had to do the necessary things to put all the cosmos back in order, to create a smooth order both in the cosmological framework, but also for everyday citizens on Earth. And this is a reflection of that story. Again, this is the story of the wandering goddess, one of my most favorite of the Kemetic belief stories. Something I wanted to share. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. If you have something, again, to add to this piece, please do so in the comment section. I definitely encourage it. And as always, I ask that you hit that like and subscribe and click the notification bell so you'll be in the loop when new videos drop.